We're going to get started here. I'm recording this as well because I will be posting it later also on my YouTube channel and also sharing the recording with the folks who submitted questions. So if anybody who's watching this wants to make sure you get your question answered, if you can't tune in live, that is not a problem at all. I completely understand, but that's why I ask when you submit your question that you tell me who you are and your email address so I can let you know that I've answered the question and then you can see the recording of it. So I'm going to jump right in. Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Hartman. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner and an AIP certified coach. And I'm going to answer a few questions today that I've been asked recently, specifically having to do with some of the tricky foods that are eliminated in the AIP elimination phase. So AIP, for anybody who doesn't know what that stands for, is the autoimmune protocol. And the autoimmune protocol, AIP, has multiple phases to it. There's first a stage where you are eliminating everything that could potentially be a problematic food and eating as much nutrient density of whatever is left as possible. So it's not just about cutting foods out, it's also about what you add in and what you do eat. But there's a lot of things that get cut out, a lot of big categories of foods. And, you know, they're a lot of times people will ask for explanations as to why, and they're all written out if you want to read about it, if you want to get into all the details. One of the best books is Sarah Ballantyne's The Paleo Approach for the people who really want all the science behind it, all the reasons why. But generally speaking, I think the best way to think of it is that you're just cutting out everything that might be triggering your autoimmunity, everything that might be. Getting a clean slate, hopefully by doing that, you're going to feel a lot better. And then once you get to that point where you can definitely feel that, you know, you're in a better place with your health, you systematically reintroduce foods, isolating them, testing them, seeing how you respond so that you know whether a particular food is problematic for you. I'm giving you this disclaimer because the first question that I'm going to answer today is about cocoa or cacao. And the question was kind of like, can I have this form of it? And cocoa, cacao, chocolate, obviously these are foods, that family of foods that a lot of people want to know answers to. They kind of understand like why I can't have a chocolate bar. You know, there's probably multiple reasons that like a Snickers bar is not going to work for us, or something that has, you know, anything that has a lot of added sugar, or other ingredients that we're avoiding anyways. Makes sense. But then they're like, well, what if I just want to eat cacao nibs or cocoa butter? Can I have that? In fact, cocoa butter was the specific question that was asked, so I'll address that. But the thing to understand is that, again, we're not trying to demonize that whole family of foods and say that these are bad for people with a particular diagnosis and that something, you know, it'll hurt you if you eat them. But to just say they might be foods that you just don't realize it, but are actually you're having trouble tolerating. Might be one of those foods. So rather than kind of try to slice and dice and figure out which form of it you really have to eliminate, you just eliminate the whole family, everything that's derived from this particular food. And then later on, you can test them in their different forms. So the question was about cocoa butter or cacao butter. There really, as far as I can tell, isn't a difference. It's just, you know, whether people want to remind us that it's coming from the cacao tree or that it's cocoa butter, which is more processed, the word for the more processed form of what comes from that tree. If you've ever seen how chocolate is made, you know that first it comes from, you know, there's a tree and they pick the fruit and they cut open the fruit and inside of it are a bunch of seeds. And those are the cocoa beans. They're called beans, but they're not legumes. They're actually seeds. And on AIP in the elimination phase, we eliminate all of the seeds that we can think of, every seed that we can, because seeds may potentially be causing autoimmune issues. The simplest way to think about it, the simplest explanation is to understand that, you know, how they function biologically. A seed wants to survive digestion, right? Just in general, a seed wants to be eaten by something and make its way through the digestive tract so that it ends up somewhere else. That's how it works, how it spreads. So just in general, generally speaking, seeds have some protective mechanisms involved in them to resist being digested, to be neutralized in the gut. That can then mean that if you're sensitive to it and you have some kind of a leaky gut situation going on, or you just have some irritation, inflammation, it could be that those seeds that are not getting digested, or even the proteins of them that get kind of chopped up in the process of grinding them or chewing them or whatever, could be a trigger for you. And then there's other issues as well, but I won't get into all of the science behind it, but just to remind you that there's nothing bad or good about these foods, except that they could potentially be a problem for you. Now, the good news about everything that falls into that family of coming from the cacao tree is that they're all pretty well tolerated when we get to the reintroduction phase. A lot of people, many people are able to reintroduce them in whatever form it is that they want. The person who submitted the question specifically was asking about cacao butter or cocoa butter, which usually in my culture is used topically, something that you would see in like a skincare product, and that would be fine. That's the first thing I want to make sure that I'm clear on. AIP is about the foods that you eat. It's not about coming into contact with these things. As far as we know, there doesn't seem to be any reason to say you should stay away from putting it on your skin if that's how you're using it. In fact, it's probably a better option than some of the more synthetic, potentially harmful chemical-based, skincare products. There's a little bit of a concern if you're going to be, say, putting it in something that you might accidentally consume it. So if we're talking about like something that would be like a lip gloss or a lip balm, but even then, it's just so minuscule that you really don't need to worry about it unless you think you should. If you have found through kind of the process of personal experience that maybe a particular food form of something does bother you, that maybe you also want to be extra careful to avoid that in your skincare products. But generally speaking, if the question is about cocoa butter or cacao butter being put on your skin, that's fine. I'm assuming that wasn't what the question was about. The question was about consuming it, and that this person had seen some conflicting information. And I'll just cut right to the chase. It still comes from a seed. So during the elimination phase, cocoa butter would be eliminated. You would not consume it, just like you don't consume anything else that comes from that cacao tree's seed. So no cocoa nibs, no cocoa powder, no cacao butter, no chocolate, dark chocolate, milk chocolate, whatever. Because again, it's the seed of that plant. Now, it stands to reason though, that when it's time to reintroduce foods, that you might want to start by reintroducing the cacao butter instead of jumping right to the dark chocolate or the cacao nibs. And the reason that might be wise, and this is just kind of outside of the general parameters of AIP, but just thinking about it for yourself, is that we do know that the cacao butter is the fat from that. So it's been pressed and processed in such a way to like extract just the fat and leave behind some of the other elements. That makes it a little bit easier to digest because of some FODMAP issues. It's going to be very low in FODMAP if it's cocoa butter. And it also will have very little of the proteins of that seed, which might potentially mean that somebody who is somewhat sensitive to it would actually tolerate the butter form of it better. It raises an interesting question for myself personally, because I'm one of those rare people who actually has tried to reintroduce like good quality dark chocolate and did not do well with it. So I stay away from it. But I never really thought about it before. I don't know. I've never tried cocoa butter or cacao butter to see if I tolerate that. I don't know. Maybe I should. Maybe if I want to try to sensitize, kind of progress through and see how I do with the dark chocolate, maybe I want to start with that. So there's a lot of, this is an ongoing thing. I just used myself as an example. I've been working with AIP and reintroductions since 2013, and I'm still experimenting. So still learning about my body, and my body's changing, which will happen too for you. But I hope that answers the question as to why? Why can't I have that kind or that particular product? Again, the simple answer is it all is coming from that seed. So if you ever look up, if it helps, just picture it, look at a picture of what does it look like, then you'll be like, oh yeah, it comes from that same thing, that same seed. I've been asked recently too about some other kind of tricky foods that fit into that same sort of, well, what about this form? What about that form? And one of the ones that comes up a lot is vanilla. And I think that recipe developers like myself, people who create recipes and then publish them and share them, we're partially to blame for this, because I think we've had some different guidance over the years and different schools of thought about whether people should be consuming vanilla in one form or not in other forms and so on. So I think most of the people listening to this are familiar with vanilla as a cooking ingredient. It is commonly added to baked goods. So, you'll see it as an ingredient in your chocolate chip cookie recipe that you made when you were a kid, or, in maybe some AIP friendly waffles that you can have otherwise now, and you're wondering about that vanilla. Now, the simplest thing to do would be to just admit it. You never need to find a substitute. And I'm just saying this from a culinary perspective. The vanilla is generally not a critical ingredient. It's flavoring. It's a flavor enhancer. It adds that kind of homey sort of, I don't even know how to describe it, the notes of vanilla that are kind of appealing, but you could just leave it out if you're uncertain. People get confused because you can go to the store and you can buy alcohol-free vanilla extract. And so the question would be, is that better? Because we also on AIP during the elimination phase eliminate alcohol. My tendency is to say, no, it's not. It may not be any worse, but it may not really be worth bothering with. The ingredients in the alcohol-free vanilla extract can also be derived from grain and from, other things that we're trying to stay away from. It's always a tiny quantity though. When you think about putting even a teaspoon of vanilla in an entire batch of, muffins, you're not consuming very much when you have one muffin. So it may not be anything you need to worry about either way. One school of thought would be to say that if it's a cooked preparation, so if we're talking about these fictional muffins or waffles or cookies, it's going to go in the oven and bake. And so the alcohol, that tiny, tiny, tiny amount of alcohol in there will get quote unquote baked off or cooked off. So it's sort of neutralized, and why not? You can have that. If it's going to be something that is in a form of cold preparation, then perhaps you would need to think about not using the alcohol if you're really worried about having the alcohol. Another option is vanilla powder. Vanilla powder is the ground up pod from vanilla. Vanilla is a legume. So if I forgot to say at the beginning, I apologize. So that's why we're concerned about it, why it would be even questionable. And it has seeds in it. But if you eat just the pod of it, you're not consuming any of those seeds. So I prefer to go for vanilla extract, just regular good organic vanilla extract with good organic alcohol, and then not worry about it. I've worked with many clients over the years, and I have never met anybody who couldn't tolerate vanilla in that small quantity. Never ever found anybody who in the reintroduction process discovered that was their, one of their triggers. So I'm kind of the school of thought of just don't worry about it. If you want to use vanilla, choose the best vanilla quality you can get. Vanilla's really expensive these days, so it wouldn't actually be so bad either if you just left it out and just sort of adapted your taste buds to not having it. That's vanilla. So the other tricky food category is just sort of this whole idea of what about legumes. So we know that we stay away from beans. We know that. We don't eat soybeans. We don't eat, dried beans, canned beans. We're going to avoid those during the elimination phase. Lentils, they have some positive, properties. So some of them can be reintroduced, but during the elimination phase, we eliminate them. One of the tricky categories then comes in when we're thinking about things that are actually kind of treat like just vegetables, like green beans or snow peas. We're mostly eating the pod. We are eating the legume part of it as well. When I first started AIP back in 2013, we treated them like the whole kind of paleo community treated it, which was that they aren't, even though they technically are legumes, because of the way we're eating them in a fresh form, they aren't likely to have the same negative health effects. And so we just go ahead and treat them like vegetables and eat them. And then, at some point, again, maybe to just provide some consistency, the consensus became that we should say, let's avoid them at first. But when it comes time to reintroduce, you can have them maybe as an early reintroduction rather than waiting until later. So that's kind of, you know, what I wanted to talk about with the tricky foods. The questions that came in this week were about cacao butter. And so I talked a little bit about chocolate in general. And then I have had a number of people recently ask me about vanilla. And again, I'll just cut to the chase on that. With vanilla, I'm kind of just of the mind of like, don't worry about it. If you want to flavor your whatever you're making with a little bit of good quality organic vanilla extract, go for it. Don't worry about it. Just enjoy the flavor of it. Or if you do want to be really on the kind of by the book side, just leave it out, omit it from the recipe entirely. It's never a crucial, like your cookies won't turn out ingredient. It's just the flavor will be a little different. So that's it. I don't want to, you know, belabor that anymore. I hope these answers helped. You guys are always welcome to ask me additional questions. If you have follow-up questions you want to the content in this particular video, you're welcome to put them in the comments here, and then I'll address them either in the comments by typing a response to it, or in my next week's session. I'm going to try to get really consistent with these every day, every Thursday, not every day, every week, every Thursday at noon Eastern time. I'll be doing these same sessions. And then you can formally submit a question by using the link that I have in the event and that I'll put in the comments below once I get this all published. So hope to hear from you all soon about how these are going. Any follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer. And I think that's it. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for watching. Bye.